Hey gang, it's me. This is my actual couch. That's not relevant to anything, I just thought I'd, mention why I'm on a couch. Anyway, this is the new episode, and I thought I'd like to share with you a little fact about making these. Do you know what is the hardest thing about making Game OverThinker episodes? Finding all the videos and pictures to go along with what I'm saying, because, frankly, you can't always. That's why sometimes you'll see me run some video from a game or reuse the same picture over and over and over again. It's kind of what happens. Look, I'm on a budget, alright? You might have just noticed a jump in the edit there. That's because I had to take a breath. Production value. Yeah. Anyway, for this one I thought I'd do something a little different to fill the time when the words are important but there's not really any good corresponding visuals to use. See, I got this forest right near my house. It's called Lynn Woods, Lynn, Massachusetts, Lynn Woods Reservation. I'm told it's the second largest municipal forest in the United States. Anyway, I thought I have all this nice little nature footage of it to use, and I'll, use that to run. So, during the period of this video when there's nothing really visual going on, please enjoy some lovely nature footage from one of our many, many national parks. So, yes, we're going to talk about Roger Ebert and his now infamous series of quotations in support of his position that video games are not and/or can never become art. But before I address Mr. Ebert, it behooves me to address Mr. Us. Him. Attention, gamers. Stop being dicks to Roger Ebert about this. And don't look at me like you don't know what I'm talking about either. Odds are someone watching this has fired off a nasty letter to Ebert over this at some point, since this has been going on for like years, and in case you didn't realize it, you're not helping. If you think someone is wrong in their argument, 9 times out of 10, sending him angry letters or bitching him out on Twitter is going to have the exact opposite of your intended effect. Never mind the fact that this isn't Jack Thompson or Michael Atkinson or any one of our other useless douchebag nemesis who are just fun to tool on. Roger Ebert is a titan of the popular culture, whose opinion, right or wrong, carries an incredible weight. If nothing else, he should have earned your respect, especially in disagreement. In fact, let's explore that part a little more. After all, if you're going to try and engage someone in debate, it's a good idea to know just who it is you're dealing with. Those of you getting the sense that this is going to be a long one, yeah, it is, so go put on some coffee. Anyway, Roger Ebert first came to prominence in the late 1960s, one of the vanguards of a new generation of fresh, open-minded film critics, to complement the fresher, more open-minded films being made in the boom times following the collapse of the old studio system. In 1967, he was one of the only critics to positively review Bonnie and Clyde, which most of the old guard critics dismissed for being too violent. Today, it's remembered as a game-changing classic. He was the first film critic ever to win the Pulitzer Prize, and as co-host of Siskel and Ebert, he helped popularize the whole idea of film critique as entertainment in its own right, and every critic with his own show today owes him a debt of gratitude, including me. He's also one of the only major modern critics to actually have made a noteworthy mark in the movies themselves. Back in the day, he wrote screenplays for Russ Meyer, whose stock in trade was high-concept movies about beautiful women with huge titties. Ebert wrote one of his all-time greatest works, Beyond the Valley of the Dolls, in which the beautiful women with huge titties start a rock band, and then later a crazy guy wails on people in an orgy with a big-ass sword. No, really, you should totally go see this movie. This movie is great. Today, Ebert is still hard at work, despite complications from cancer resulting in his jaw having to be removed. Okay, quick show of hands, fellas. How many of you can honestly say that if you lost the bottom of your face, you'd still go back to your day job? Yeah, that's what I thought. Not so many. So, yeah, let's show the proper regard here, because let's face it, disagree with Ebert all you like, and spoiler alert, I plan to, he kinda rules. I mean, this is as close to badass as a movie critic gets, so give their propers where they're due. Now to the heart of the matter. A few years or so back, Ebert got engaged into the broader debate on the artistic merits of video games versus film. Unsurprisingly, Ebert came down on the side of the movies, but it was the logic of his conclusion that struck a nerve. In Ebert's estimation, film was the superior form almost by mere default. In his opinion, film could be art, while video games could not. Now, it's likely that Ebert wasn't aware that the question of games as art was already the subject of a long-term, passionate debate in the gaming community. but it's basically understandable that said community reacted as strongly as it did. When you're already the proponent of a somewhat controversial position, having one of the most prominent voices in the popular culture come down on the other side isn't precisely good news. And since the gamer community and the angry vocal internet community so often tend to be one and the same, Ebert got an earful. In fact, responses to Roger Ebert like this one are only slightly less commonly seen throughout the gamer sphere than sarcastic PS3 photoshops and Triforce tramp stamps. Well, let me just jump right in then. Roger, Mr. Ebert, I disagree. Or at least, I think I disagree. See, this has gone back and forth so many times it starts to become apparent that the debate is only partially about video games and at least partway about semantics, i.e. the specific meanings of words. That's where it starts to get complicated. When it's just, yes they are, no they aren't, yes they are, no they aren't, back and forth for infinity, it's nice and simple, but it doesn't go anywhere. Exploring what it really is we're talking about might just be the key to mutual understanding. See, art is one of those words that's taken on radically different meanings throughout history, so settling on a definition becomes a difficult matter of personal interpretation. I can't pretend to know exactly how Ebert intends his use, but I can give you my definition, and since, name of the show and all, I can explain where I get it from. To avoid boring anyone more than I already planned to, I'll skip over the stuff about Latin roots or Greek pronunciations and all the other stuff I'd have to pretend to understand, but basically, for a long-ass time, the word art simply meant the specific skill you use to do your job. Art of science, art of masonry, art of combat, art Garfunkel, arty ziff, and so on. So artist pretty much just meant guy with job, and that was how it went right up through the Middle Ages, until it started to evolve. The first big shift in perception, at least in the West, probably came during the Italian Renaissance. This was the period where, for the first time since the fall of Rome, the class of people with enough wealth and thus leisure to patronize the creative and academic arts for reasons of aesthetic value rather than utilitarian value was large enough for those professions to serve as wide-ranging, sustainable employment. And so the perception of artists went from simply being interchangeable with craftsmen to being a class of uniquely creative individuals in their own right unto themselves. It was the first time in centuries that a painter, a sculptor, etc. could become celebrities, which is what happened with figures like Leonardo, Michelangelo, Donatello, Raphael, or the Shredder. With artist now a position of celebrity and merit, the term work of art slowly transformed from a simple matter-of-fact description to a shorthand compliment in and of itself. And over centuries of linguistic mutation, that shorthand got even shorter, and by about the 19th century, art and something nice became essentially interchangeable terms. So looking back on that and trying to form what I'd consider the most historically comprehensive and linguistically correct definition of art, here's what I came up with. A creative work appreciated and or intended to be appreciated in and of itself. In other words, art is something that's made to be regarded strictly on sensory merits, without requiring but not necessarily precluding that it serve any specific utilitarian function. I think this is what Oscar Wilde was getting at when he famously quipped, "All art is useless." Speaking of Oscar Wilde, and since I've probably gone too far too long without saying anything either about video games or remotely funny, here's some footage from a Chowaniki game. Wow, that was mantastic. Anyway, as far as I'm concerned, art shouldn't be, or at least doesn't need to be, used as a compliment, but rather as a descriptive, a statement of format, not of quality. To call a picture a work of art should carry the same matter-of-fact neutrality of judgment as calling a chimney a work of bricks, or a cheerleader pyramid a work of fine. Let me demonstrate. This is the Mona Lisa, painted by Leonardo da Vinci as part of a bafflingly elaborate conspiracy to keep Dan Brown's heirs from ever having to get real jobs. This is a cheesy blacklight poster you get at a Spencer's Gifts, painted by someone with student loans to pay off who probably hates their life and wishes they'd minored in a more marketable skill. Which one is art? Trick question. Both of them are. One is good art, the other is bad art. This, then, would probably be where Ebert and I fundamentally disagree, though again I can only theorize based on what he's been quoted as saying. It appears that in Ebert's usage, art is defined not just in form but also in quality, although form definitely figures in as well. See, one of the earliest, 2005 to be exact, statements from Ebert that helped the whole fracas blow up was that he considered games to be, and I'm quoting, inherently inferior to film and literature. He then elaborated on his rationale. Video games, by their nature, require player choices, which is the opposite of the strategy of serious film and literature, which requires authorial control. Alright, now we're kind of getting somewhere. Going by these quotes, the important distinction to make is not what Ebert thinks of video games, but what definition and or context he intends by use of art or art form. In this particular case, it would appear that among his qualifications for something to be art is a singularity of authorship. Paintings are made by a painter, statues by a sculptor, books by a writer, etc. The question of authorship has a long history of being a factor in separating art from not art. In fact, for a long time, it was often used to dismiss the artistic merit of Mr. Ebert's chosen medium. Yeah. See, up until about the mid-40s, most serious patrons of the arts steadfastly refused to regard movies as being an art form in the same sense as, say, painting. The logic behind this outlook was that film had too many cooks, that being a collaborative process combining theater, photography, music, and other disciplines, filmmaking lacked the singularity of vision implicit in a sculpture or a picture, which were presumed to come from the vision and effort of a single individual creator. In the 1950s, a group of French movie lovers turned movie makers set out to change that. Under the leadership of François Truffaut and Jean-Luc Godard, they used the bully pulpit of their ultra-influential film journal Cahiers du Cinéma to argue that while film was collaborative, the hand of the director had the most influence, and that in exploring movies in the context of who directed them was the key to appreciating film on the traditional art and artist level. This was called AUTEUR theory, and it would eventually form the basis for the entire second renaissance of American film criticism, a generational movement in which Ebert was a key figure. Now, to be fair, while there's ample poetic irony to be had in that respect, Ebert's argument vis-a-vis authorship is less about how many people it takes to make a game, and more about the fact that a game needs the input of a player to function. Given that interactive art is even more nebulously defined than art, there's a bit more merit to that line of argument. It does beg the question, of course, as to whether or not he'd similarly discount audience participation improv from theater or choose-your-own-adventure books from literature, though neither of those are typically considered to be near the top of their respective mediums to begin with. And that kind of brings us all the way back around, right? To engage the specific question of whether or not games can be art, one must first engage the much broader question of whether or not the word art is used to mean something creative, or something creative that is also good. And what's my answer? Well, as you've probably already divined, since I consider art to be neutral, non-judgmental statement of format, i.e. there is good art, bad art, and a whole spectrum worth of shit in between, yes, video games are art. Hooray! Yeah! Yes, we all know that that's what most of you wanted to hear me say. Now, here's the part you don't want to hear me say. While I conclude that video games are art, as an honest man, I must also conclude that a lot of them, perhaps even most of them, are bad art. Look, fellas, I love video games. If I didn't, you wouldn't be watching the 35th episode of my video game show, now would you? Right? Probably not. But you gotta look at things you like with honest eyes. I mean, I also love cheeseburgers, but I know they aren't all created equal. McDonald's isn't as good as Five Guys, and Five Guys isn't as good as a home-grilled Kobe patty with Munster cheese and fresh avocado on a toasted potato roll. But they're all better than Roy Rogers. It's all about gradation. If video games were paintings, Pong would be that cave in France, Uncharted would be fucking Banksy, I guess, and the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel would be Super Mario Bros. 3. If video games were statues, Mega Man would be Christ the Redeemer, Halo would be a Bob's Big Boy, and the Lashan Buddha would be Super Mario Bros. 3. Hell, if video games were films, oh man, this is getting a little tenuous, but Final Fantasy XIII would be Cleopatra, Braid would be Eraserhead, and Citizen Kane would be Super Mario Bros. 3. I really like Super Mario Bros. 3. So when it comes to looking at the artistic merit of gaming as a whole, there's a lot of games that'd look fine on the cover of a Trapper Keeper, but not a whole lot that I'd be looking to frame and hang up in the Met. That about cover it? Whole lot of Thomas Kincaid, not a whole lot of Monet. So, video games as art? Sure. Video games as good art? Not for the most part, no. Having arrived at this ultimate thesis, I did what anyone with an inevitably controversial position would do. I went and looked for famous smart people who agreed with me. And guess who I found? That's right, Roger Ebert. See, back in June 2007, Clive Barker gave the keynote speech at the Hollywood and Games Summit. As part of his speech, he took exception to Ebert's original quote. About a month later, Ebert wrote up an article in response to Barker's response in which he clarified his original position. Said Ebert then, "Anything can be art, even a can of Campbell's soup. What I should have said is that games could not be high art, as I understand it." Huh. You know, if you were to swap out could not be for usually haven't been so far, that's pretty much what I said. Huh. So then, Mr. Ebert, Roger, it would appear that I still disagree, but that our disagreement is mostly about semantics and chronology. You think games aren't high art yet, and probably won't be. I'd say that some games already are high art. And Chrono Trigger, Portal, Braid, No More Heroes, and yes, Super Mario Bros. 3 would seem to back me up on that. And that brings us to the present, in which Ebert has written yet another response piece on the subject. You can read the whole thing here, and I encourage that you do, but it's basically a summary restatement of where it seems his thought process has been all along. The important part comes at the end, where he asks a pertinent question of all of us. Why do we care what he thinks? After all, he isn't a game critic, and even being probably the world's most powerful film critic doesn't give him final authority over what is and isn't art in the first place. So why does it bug us so much whenever he has something to say about this? Well, frankly, I think it's because we're insecure. Insecure because deep down, we all know that gaming isn't as artistically accomplished as it ought to be at this point. I mean, is there really any excuse for how visually unimaginative the ocean of gray-brown military shooters dominating the next-gen landscape is? Is there really an excuse for how stilted the writing tends to be, even in good games? Sadly, I think that in large part we're all too willing to accept the current scenario, where the artistic standards of the vast majority of this medium have more in common with Michael Bay than Stanley Kubrick, and we cling to even the tiny minority of games that attempt transcendent artistic vision for validation, as though the existence of one Braid makes up for the ocean of bombastic emptiness all around it. So when someone of any notoriety comes along and opines, "Nope, that one doesn't count either," we get defensive. And for that, we have no one to blame but ourselves. Because soon enough, no matter how much we fight it or say otherwise, the next bloated next-gen franchise blockbuster is going to drop with the same old tired-ass art design and several $1 million of rendering built around 25 cents worth of writing, and we're going to buy it, and we're going to play it, and even if it turns out to be a dud, artistically unfulfilled isn't going to be the reason any of us give when we take it back to GameStop. Whereupon we'll trade it in for store credit and pick up a copy of one of those high art games we remembered hearing was good. Used. Meaning that our purchase is now too late to do any good and encouraging better games to be made. And then we'll complain about things never changing. Maybe we need to do better.